Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second seminar of the day, and it's my pleasure to introduce Scott Pearson, who's a senior cyber engineer from Checkpoint. Checkpoint's a well-established AV company. I first came along upon them at InfoSecurity Europe in 1998, when they were just setting up. So they've got a long career in AV and other products, and I'm told they have about 80 products on offering today. Scott is not the advertised speaker. He's been pushed in at short notice. The original speaker's missed his boat. And Scott, we're delighted to have you here, and we're looking forward to what you've got to say. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. Realise everyone's coming back from lunch, so if I see any eyes closing, people sleeping, I'm going to put it down to sort of some food comas and not my content, what I'm delivering today. As explained, Mo unfortunately can't be here today, so thoughts are with him, but you've got me. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but let's find out. So I'm here to talk about adopting a prevention-first strategy. And in terms of what we'll cover, so we'll start off with looking at the threat intelligence. We want to look at sort of, are you reviewing supplier chain risks and what your strategies are around that? We also want to look at the Microsoft line. So we hear that line's being spoken about customers who use Microsoft products for business tools, but then what about their security? We want to cover on non-exploited vulnerabilities, and then who's got your back when it comes to security vendors and vulnerabilities within the security vendors. And then finally, I'm going to sort of, the main piece is cover about prevention first for remote workforce. So starting with threat intelligence reports, so we make these available powered by our Checkpoint research team. So this is generated with the UK, looking at sort of the different weekly attacks. So if we look at some of the stats, we've got 707 times each week organisations are attacked over sort of a 6-month period. And when we look at that, 79% of the malicious files in those attacks came through email. That was over a 30-day period. And of that 79%, PDF were the top files that were coming through. If we look at the percent of impacted organisations and the attacks that are impacting them organisations, we're looking at remote code execution, information disclosure, so we're looking at things like data loss, authentication bypass, so this is not needing to capture sort of credentials, but being able to exploit vulnerabilities to circumvent authentication to breach. And then finally, we've got denial of service. Our research is taken from sort of a variety of intelligence feeds. We ingest telemetry information from all our security products that are deployed in over 100,000 customers globally, as well as our analysts being able to proactively hunt for threats and enrich that threat intelligence. And then last but not least, if we look at the weekly attacks per organisation in the UK, we can see when this report was ran sort of just a couple of weeks ago, education and research being sort of the top hit at 1,600 attacks on a weekly basis. So there are obviously environments with enriched IP, utilities and government military. This does sort of change, but we tend to find in sort of research it's sort of the same verticals that just tend to change the sort of top 4 spots really. And if we look at the cybersecurity breaches survey, and we want to look at customers who are proactively reviewing the the supply chain and what the risks are at the current supply chain. What we found interesting from the survey, overall, only 13% of all businesses were carrying out the work to review them risks. Now that ranges from 9% as low as 9% with the charities, but then looking at the large firms, which were 44%, 34% being finance. That's still really low numbers in terms of organisations who are not doing the due diligence in terms of we've secured ourselves, but what are we doing then in terms of our suppliers of software code or maybe the security services that you're consuming? How can we make sure that we're safe when we consume that software? And then when we look at organisations who were, backtrack slightly again, and when we look at the supply chain, when that was the immediate supply chain. If we then look at the wider supply chain, so we're talking about suppliers of your suppliers, that percentage of businesses who were doing that research dropped in half again. So we're looking at a low of 7% overall businesses who are looking at that threat landscape in terms of suppliers. And then when we look in that breaches survey and we look at organisations that have a formal cybersecurity strategy, only 23% of overall businesses have a formal strategy. Now, the large organisations were leading the way at 57%, 48% for finance, but still, when cybersecurity awareness and training is so entrenched in a lot of what we do day to day now, it's surprising that it's still quite a low percentage of organisations who don't have that formal strategy. And when we look at businesses who are using external cybersecurity providers, that's only 4 out of 10. So the takeaway here is, are we doing enough to look at our cybersecurity strategy of our business? And when we talk about what is your cybersecurity strategy, some of the conversations we're having, which is worrying, is, well, we use Microsoft, we buy everything from Microsoft, we don't need anything else, we're happy, we're secure. But hopefully you'll see sort of when we go through a bit more information, you may want to rethink that. And I'm not here to bash any other vendors, by the way, but we really do need to challenge, I think, the security partners that we're working with. We can't just take at face value, and I get the irony of me saying this, but you can't take at face value what security vendors are saying. We need to challenge it. We need to make sure they have demonstrable security effectiveness. So, starting with, now, Microsoft are absolutely making massive investments into their security, but the track record isn't there yet. So we've got to take that into consideration when you're evaluating the security partners that you're choosing to work with in terms of what is their heritage. They're also at the top with most vulnerable vendors when you look at in terms of the number of CVEs that are being sort of developed. The zero-day protection is not in real time. It can take up to 15 minutes for Defender to look at sandboxing files and making them available. And when we look at ransomware restoration, it's using Windows Shadow Copy, which we know can be bypassed. Coincidentally, other security vendors also use Windows Shadow Copy, so we're also susceptible to that same vulnerability, if you will. And then finally, a reputation for missing the phishing and social engineering techniques. So what we're saying here is, why are customers buying this? Because it's easy to bolt on. And we're not saying it's bad, but what we're saying is it shouldn't be your only line of defense. You shouldn't just rely on that single layer of security. What we want you to do is look at taking a multi-layer approach. And I think if we look at those exploited vulnerabilities, so CISA maintain the authoritative source on known exploited vulnerabilities that have been exploited in the wild. And if we take a look at the sort of top 20 that we listed on here, we can see, vendors that we know, we work with on a day-to-day basis. What was surprising for me was the number of security vendors that were in that top 20 list. And I think that really, we've got to ask ourselves in terms of making sure we're not releasing vulnerabilities in our security software, because if we can't secure our security products, how can we make sure we can secure you? Now, the thing is, all software vendors are prone to bugs and vulnerabilities, but we've got to make sure it doesn't become a trend, and we need to make sure there's a sense of urgency when a software vulnerability is highlighted. We need to make sure then vendors are releasing patches and fixing that as quickly as possible. When we look at this, and I've taken off sort of the vendor names, they are available if people want to do a bit more digging. But based on what I just said about, people who are released, security vendors who have vulnerabilities, if you look, we have 13 times less high-profile vulnerabilities than other competing top tier 1 security vendors. And as I said, everybody can have a vulnerability. But what do you do when you find we're 22 times faster at responding and making sure them vulnerabilities are fixed? And when we look at things like over the last 2 years, Checkpoint have had 0 high-profile CVEs in the past 2 years. And we also weren't vulnerable to the Log4j, which was the massive vulnerability that was obviously published around Christmas time. While we sort of on that topic of supplier chains, so we were at SolarWinds a couple of years ago, Log4j at Christmas, when we look at the software supply chain attacks, that's increased up to 650% last year. And when we dig a bit more deeper into that, 66% of those supply chain attacks were leveraging unknown vulnerabilities. So unknown vulnerabilities being never been seen before, 0-day attacks. 16% were only leveraging known software flaws. So things, traditional security that are using signatures, such as antivirus, IPS, would not have been able to prevent the 66% of supply chain attacks. So when we look at that prevention-first strategy, you've got to dovetail that in with making sure that you can protect unknown threats and that the security partner you're working with has the technology to be able to identify and block those unknown. Looking at most attacks, they were targeting the software code. We can see that 82% were accessing third-party vendors, 76% providing roles that allow sort of account takeover, and 90% of security teams weren't even aware that the permissions were granted. So here we're talking about things like shadow IT. We're also talking about DevOps in the cloud as well. So I remember when I started 16 years ago, the only way you could launch a new service is if you had a server under your arm, you got access to the data center, you could physically install it, patch it in, you had to raise a change request, and then you could get access to your service. Now, developers can spin up services in public cloud, and they're needing to keep pace with business objectives, but we need to make sure that security can keep up with them. And unless your security partner has the solutions to be able to keep pace with the speed of DevOps, then you're going to struggle to wrap the security around that sort of agile business practice. I think just reiterating that the only way we can win each battle is by preventing those unknown threats. A lot of vendors rely on detection and remediation, but if you're letting the first thing through and it's taking a couple of minutes for you to analyze and then make a decision, a lot can happen in those 2 minutes, whether that's clicking on a malicious link, whether that's opening a file with malware, whether that's enabled to proliferate through sort of east-west, sort of behind the firewall. So we really need to focus on preventing unknown attacks. And the 3 principles that I want to look at for adopting that prevention-first strategy is looking at threat intelligence and research. So I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about sort of Threat Cloud, which is our threat intelligence sort of data lake. But we need to make sure we can use the information that we generate from the threat intelligence and we make it actionable. We can operationalize it. I didn't even know that was a word until I saw it here. But we want to make sure we can do something with that threat intelligence. We want to power the technology to make decisions based on that. And with that, we have that multi-layer. We're using threat intelligence, but we're using the research from the analytics to be able to contextualize the data and make sure that what the decisions they're making make sense, maybe correlating trends, but also doing some proactive threat hunting as well, which can help power that technology. The second aspect is about prevention. Don't compromise your security by detecting and then remediating. So again, on that multi-layer threat prevention, that Checkpoint, we integrate with all our technology. We don't rely just on one engine, whether that's multi-layer threat prevention in each product, in a portfolio of products, or even our entire security architecture. We want to build that layer of security. And then finally, consolidation, using a unified architecture to block those sort of modern, unknown sort of threats. And what we want to do is we want to form a shield wall. So the shield wall was so effective because the shields overlap with the soldier next to you, and you protected yourself and your fellow soldiers. And we want to do that with our technology. By having that single ecosystem powered by the threat intelligence and research, you may have a colleague accessing a file over email in the UK that is blocked because it's malicious, and we see that as an unknown threat. We then populate that information through all our enforcement points. Therefore, the colleague who's then downloading that same file from a website in the US is automatically protected. And this is what I mean about the technology being powered by that threat intelligence and research, integrated, all being managed by a single management platform. Just quickly looking at Threat Cloud. So this really is the brain behind our technology. So as the brain split into half, we look at part of the brain being big data, looking at the telemetry information we ingest from all our products, whether that's firewalls, IoT, cloud, whether it's email, endpoint, mobile. We then feed all that security events in there. We also subscribe to IOC feeds, and as I say, we also have our checkpoint research team feeding into that data as well. And then on the other side of the brain, we have our AI and machine learning technologies. We've got over 30 sort of engines that are then able to analyze all that data to be able to identify and block sort of emerging threats. I mentioned about synchronizing that information. When we see a threat for the first time, synchronizing that globally across all our enforcement points. We do that in under 2 seconds. So again, making sure that we can ensure that when we're adopting that prevention first, we also need to balance it by giving you quick decisions. We don't want to slow your business down. So the last bit I want to focus on is looking at the remote workforce and sort of applying prevention first strategy in this area. I think we all know, we've talked about it for long enough, that remote work is here to stay. We're now adopting these hybrid sort of strategies. 50% of businesses are reporting that all their employees want to at least work from remotely 2 days a week. So we need to look at obviously providing that ubiquitous experience, working anywhere, any device, accessing any application. And if we look at some of the statistics that we did on our remote workforce survey last year, we're showing that 70% of companies are allowing access to corporate assets from personal devices, whether that's laptops or mobiles. 32% are allowing access to corporate assets from third parties, so they could be contractors, suppliers, and then 17%, it's not on the slide, but 17% are only mandating that only corporate-owned devices can access, where a lot of businesses have a mixed policy. You know, where they may give you elevated access if you're on a corporate-owned device, but then they will want to allow a certain level of access from BYOD devices. So how can we help you secure that? Because when you look at the different paths that attackers can take to infiltrate and access your assets, whether that is from a mobile phone, looking at malicious applications, or looking at a man-in-the-middle attack, how many times I've lost count on how many smishing text messages I'm receiving from Royal Mail or DHL over the last couple of years. And that's something really hard to detect on a mobile. You can't hover over it, it's a shortened link. And a lot are succumbing to these sort of phishing types attacks over mobile. We've got email, phishing, file shares. So again, I'll talk about it a little bit more. Collaboration tools. Email used to only be the way we shared files. You know, of course, FTP links, but typically in business, it was emails. Now we're using Microsoft 365, G Suite, we're using Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive. We need to make sure we've got the same level of security on our collaboration tools, any method of file share that we've got with email. So when we look at Checkpoint Harmony, it's the industry's first unified solution for users, devices, and access. We look at where you're coming from, whether you're home, on the go, the office, what you're accessing, whether this is secure internet, corporate resources hosted either in private data center or public cloud, or you maybe have accessing data in SaaS services. And we look at the products that make the Harmony family, which is endpoint security. We have Zero Trust Corporate Access, which is about clientless access, secure internet access, which is really about sort of CASB or software, secure web gateways, firewall as a service in the cloud. Email and collaboration, which I've talked about, in terms of are we securing Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, and then again mobile security, which I really do feel is a overlooked area. When we look at how much data are on our mobiles, we have your calendars, your emails, where have you been, any files that you may have downloaded and accessed, not just from mobile devices, but from tablets. The Harmony Connect remote access is about securing access to corporate resources. We have our VPN as a service, which is client-based, giving you layer 3 access. We can do device posture checking, or we can provide you clientless access. So this is giving you a nice user-friendly web interface integrated into your identity providers, whether that's Okta, Ping, Azure AD, and we can then, using a zero trust strategy, then only give your users access to application that they're allowed to, effectively acting as a reverse proxy in that perspective. So now clearly you can see this. Essentially, all we wanted to show on that video was with ransomware, the difference that we take with other vendors. We're not using Windows Shadow Copy. We have our own hidden partition. Only checkpoint sign processors can access that. So we're not susceptible to the same vulnerability as other vendors. The other thing is about automatically restoring the files. So no user intervention needed, no headlonging calls with sysadmins. The files are automatically restored and the user can continue with their work. Feedback from security admins is what's taking up a lot of the time, is one, first of all, investigating and piecing everything together of what's happened, but then it's also restoring from backups and getting that unit up and working again. I think just conscious of time, so looking at Harmony Endpoint, again, when we talk about consolidation, we talk about multi-layer threat prevention. I want to point out here, within the client, not only are we providing endpoint protection, but we also have our EDR, so our endpoint detection and response capability built into the client and our management platform. Harmony Internet Access, we provide in multiple ways. We have a little nano agent that's installed in the browser, so there's no need to worry about SSL inspection, because the browser is terminating the SSL connection, but then we can provide the security for things like anti-phishing, corporate password reuse. We can also look at file downloads as well. So one of the things that I've got a video coming up, you'll see that with anti-phishing, we lock the input field and we only release that once we know that the page is safe. And with file downloads, we clean the file first and we give you a clean copy of the file. So within seconds, you've got the file either converted as a PDF or with the active content stripped out. And if you want to get the original file after it's been sandboxed, emulated, and confirmed as okay, you can still download that using just clicking on the Get Original link. We also look at things like URL filtering as well. The secure web gateway is putting your firewall as a service. So this is being able to deploy a firewall in minutes in the cloud. You steer your users' traffic into the cloud, and that same level of security that you get on a checkpoint gateway on-premise with URL, application control, anti-malware, threat prevention, DLP is all available for you to build that policy in the cloud. So this is the video demonstrating. I think that's turned my mic there, thank you. So this is the video demonstrating, well, first of all, the endpoint client with the software blades enabled. We then see the nano agent installed on sort of the extensions. Here, as you browse to a website, you click on the site, you've got input fields, you click into that, and you'll see that the box is frozen while we scan it by our zero phishing. We then obviously release it once we're happy. We look for about 300 different indicators. We're not just looking for IP address, DNS. We're looking for a high number of things. We can see then in the extension a history of the sites that have been scanned and sort of the verdict of these. I think when they made these videos, they put too many examples together of what you're clicking on. You also have the option to report phishing sites via the agent if you don't, if we, if there has been a false positive and you feel a site is phishing, you can report that back. And then just before I move on, I just want to show you it's called content disarm and reconstruction. It's just a fancy way of saying file sanitization. And that's really where you download a file. We're getting there. And you can see the file downloaded straight away. But what's actually happened, we can see in the browser extension, we can see that's been converted. So the file's been cleaned and it's been delivered to the user. So what's the relevance of that? So this again goes back to adopting a threat prevention first strategy. Any malware we want to stop getting on that machine. So the first thing we do is strip the active content out, and then we analyze it in the background. Email and collaboration. So we have sort of patent to make sure that we can be preemptively preventing malicious emails hitting the inbox. Where we talk about a lot of vendors doing detect and remediate, in this use case, an email will come into your inbox, and then it may take up to a couple of minutes then for that to be analysed, a verdict reached, and then that email removed from the inbox. But this is where I talked about users being able to click on links, open files. We need to make sure that malicious email does not get into the inbox in the first place. Harmony Mobile. So we look at applications, preventing download of malicious apps. The network, so again, we're preventing man-in-the-middle attacks. We're looking at URL filtering, which is quite a differentiator with mobile security. We're also looking at things like file download. So we're the only mobile threat defense solution that, what I just explained on the endpoint, being able to emulate files, so that's putting it in a sandbox, we can do that on mobile. And then finally, device and operating system, looking at vulnerabilities and any configuration changes, feeding that back. We integrate with leading MDM providers. MDM shouldn't be mistaken for security, it's device management. Yes, you can set access control policies, but if you really want to keep the users and the data safe on the mobile, you need a threat defense solution. I think just summarizing on Harmony, hopefully you see it's sort of very simple to use. It's all managed from a single administrative platform in terms of that and the management, and it's simple to buy. So when we look at the commercial package, you can buy each one of them products individually, or of course it comes as a bundle. And that's really where you can get them cost savings about consolidating security, single management. I think the main thing I just want to show here is, so this is Checkpoint on a page. You can see the breadth of the different attack vectors that we cover. The thing that we launched just the other day was our new Horizon pillar. So this is about unified management and security operations. So these are going off topic a little bit, but this is our XDR, our MDR, MPR platform, as well as looking at events across all the different attack vectors. So I'm not Mo, as you probably gathered by now. I'm really interested in just talking to people who are on that threat prevention sort of cyber journey. This is sort of, I'm available on LinkedIn to sort of connect. If you're already working with Checkpoint, reach out to your local SE. If not, please sort of feel free to come and talk to us either on the stand or sort of reach out on LinkedIn. I think just to summarise, Checkpoint, we pioneered sort of the security industry for nearly 30 years. We want you to bring that prevention to the top of your agenda. And I think looking deeply, we want you to look at your supply chain, but also your security partners that you're working with. And I think just to finish really, prevention, sort of not detection, because once the malware's inside, it's already too late. Okay, thank you very much.